Welcome back everybody. In today's video I want to go through some of my favorite wood and paint combinations from over the years of my YouTube channel. Now you guys know my regular introduction. I talk about how sometimes I paint and sometimes I don't, but I always do what I can to save old pieces from the trash. That still rings true even though I don't paint quite as much now as I used to. I find myself preferring to restore wood, but it really depends on the piece, and sometimes a little bit of paint can take something that's fairly ordinary and make it extraordinary. And let's not forget that not all wood is created equal, and some pieces were made of wood that was meant to be covered, whether it was with stain or paint. There are also a few pieces in this compilation where there isn't much wood, and I actually add more wood into the pieces, and you'll see that as well. I'm making this compilation to both inspire people and also hope that I can prove the point that sometimes a little bit of paint can go a long way in making a piece really stand out. Now this piece that I'm working on here I picked up from Facebook Marketplace, and it is one of the stinkiest dressers I've had to work on in a long time. I threw everything I had at this piece, from ozone machines to vinegar and sunlight, different types of cleaners, mold killer, and finally ended up using an order blocking primer. There was a ton of finish issues, chipped veneer, it only had 2 casters, and this just needed some love. Now every time I talk about this piece, I get people that start crying about the patina being lost here as I'm stripping this off. You need to understand that patina and damage are not the same thing, and this piece was so severely damaged with its finish that it was actually compromising the longevity of the piece. With the exception of museum quality antiques, which are very rare actually, and perhaps something with sentimental value, patina is not always the most important thing. Extending the life of the piece is, and even museum quality pieces do get restored when they are damaged. For this piece, I'm opting to do just a small amount of paint. I think it equated to maybe 4 tablespoons. Basically, I decided to paint the legs and a couple of trim pieces in the front, and everything else is going to remain wood grain. As we take a look back at what I started with, it's hard to believe that this piece has actually come so far. Now, some of you are going to crucify me for using paint. Keep in mind the title of this video is going to be paint in every single one. Paint is not the enemy. Neglect is. So moving on to the next piece, this is one that I did way back in the beginning. This was within, I think, the first 5 or 6 months of having my YouTube channel. And this is your quintessential 70s-ish, big, chunky, clunky dresser. Now, there are some people that like this style, and I can say that for pretty much anything. But for a lot of us, especially the kind of younger generation, they want things that offer this amount of storage, but maybe slightly elevated, updated a bit. So while this piece is not in terrible condition, there are a few little repairs I need to make. I'm going to be stripping the top completely, sanding it down to bare wood, staining it and sealing it, but the bottom and all of the drawers are going to have what I call my one coat paint technique. It's kind of like a paint wash, but not really, because I'm not taking this down to bare wood and we're not wiping any of it back, but you'll see that in a few minutes. Basically, the goal of this technique is to give it sort of a paint wash look without having to take it back to bare wood. It does a couple of things. It lets you apply a pop of color without obscuring the grain and without getting paint into the grain because it still has its original finish, just lightly scuffed. And it's just kind of unique. I haven't seen a lot of people do something quite like this. Any areas that had some filler, I added a little bit of clear primer to, just to make sure that the paint was absorbing the same way over those areas. And this actually looks a lot different dry than it does when it's wet, and I'll show you here just with a heat gun kind of what that looks like. Now, people either love or hate this look. I think it's kind of neat, and I would love to experiment again with some different colors. Now, even though I was happy with how this was turning out, I wasn't really sure what to do with the hardware. I was going to put new hardware on it, but I wasn't sure what would look good with this big clunky piece. So I ended up reusing the same hardware. I really just cleaned it up and added a little touch of gold to it. But what was bugging me about this piece is it just looked weird sitting on the ground. So I opted to make a leg assembly for that. Now, if I were doing this today, I would do it slightly different. I would have tried to remove or maybe minimize the plinth base that was already on it. Because sometimes I find pieces look a little weird when they've got an added leg assembly and then a plinth base on top of it. It just kind of looks awkwardly long. But, you know, I was still pretty new at this kind of thing back then. So although I do like it, I probably would change a few things up at this point. So looking back at what I started with, again, like I said, it wasn't in terrible condition, but I thought this deserved a bit of an upgrade and I wanted to experiment, to be honest. I did end up adding a touch of gold to the hardware just to kind of help it match that sort of yellowish gold colored oak. And you can see what I mean there about the bottom. The plinth base just looks a little bit odd on the leg assembly, and I would try to figure out a way around that at this point in time. But overall, super happy with how it turned out. And actually, this piece was based on this piece, which is one that I had done a few months before I did that one. So this one's a bit of a two-parter. I ended up getting a dresser set. It was a long dresser and 2 nightstands, and yes, this is the condition they were in. Now, someone had applied this crackle finish, which I'm sure might have looked really cool when it was first new. This was all the rage, you know, a couple decades back. Nacho was very intrigued by what was going on here, but in this clip, I'm going to be working on the dresser, and then we're going to tackle the nightstands in a later clip in this video. These pieces were a mess, and as soon as I saw them on Marketplace, I knew that I had to save them or try to save them. Now, I got lucky with this piece. The majority of it was solid pine, and that afforded me a little bit more in terms of options. And every time I work on crackle paint, I have someone tell me, you gotta be careful, that's lead paint. No, it's not. Not in this case. This was actually a deliberate technique that someone did, and I do test pretty much every piece anyway, especially if there's multiple layers. I will test every single layer just to make sure. But I don't honestly think this piece is even old enough to have lead paint. That kind of stopped being used in the 80s. So as I'm pulling the paint off, I can see that they had filled the original holes, and you can see that old, sometimes people call them bat wings. Bat wing handles, not my favorite. I'm glad they actually changed it up. But my goal for this piece is going to be to keep the top section wood, so the actual top, and then the top row of drawers, as well as the trim along the front, that's going to be wood, and everything below that is going to be painted. Although, because this is knotty pine, it's going to inherently have a bit of a rustic nature, even though I'm trying to update it. I do want to modernize this trim at the bottom a little bit. I'm going to be cutting off some of those little curves. There's just too many. I don't like waves in furniture. You guys know that by now. Now, one thing I didn't count on is that although you can see the top and the sides here and the trim is all knotty pine, these front panels are birch. This wood was meant to look like this. It was meant to have fairly thick, semi-opaque color. When you strip all that back and you're down to the raw wood, it kind of changes things. So a few other repairs I needed to make were to create new drawer glides, as well as fix these corners. Now, sometimes you can use something like Bondo for this. Because this is a corner, it's fairly straightforward. I'm actually just going to be putting in a new block of pine, gluing and clamping it, and then I'll shape it later. In the meantime, I'm going to make some new drawer slides. Now, this is one of the first things I taught myself to make when I bought a table saw. It's one of the reasons I wanted one. This is one of the most common repairs in furniture flipping. Drawer slides that are broken or missing. Pine is notorious for being a bit of a bleeder, and basically what that means is sometimes the tannins that are naturally occurring in the wood can leach through your paint if it's not sealed. So everywhere I'm going to be painting, I just sealed with shellac, which is one of the only things that will stop bleed through. I couldn't decide between these two colors, so I ended up mixing them together to make a custom color. I knew I wanted to use a stain on the top, but pine and birch can both be a little bit blotchy, so I opted to use some wood conditioner beforehand, which will help the stain settle in a lot more evenly. Now, while the hardware that was on this piece that the previous refinisher used wouldn't be the first style that I would go for, they weren't terrible, and honestly I didn't want to put any more money into these pieces. Pieces that are in terrible condition like this, the return on investment is honestly not very good usually. So sometimes you have to kind of rein it in a little bit, and that's what I opted to do here. I opted to reuse the hardware. I don't think I could be happier with how this piece turned out. I think it's absolutely beautiful. Especially considering what I started out with. It's quite remarkable that this piece looks as good as it does. It's kind of an interesting juxtaposition between country and modern. The updated paint color and stain, as well as losing those sort of curvy bits on the bottom, kind of update it, but Knotty Pine is inherently rustic, so it's this really cool blend, I think. Now I just have to tackle the nightstands. But first we're going to take a look at this mid-century piece. Again, this is an example of something that is not in terrible shape. There's definitely some repairs to make, but it's not terrible. It's just kind of boring. And just because a piece is kind of mid-century in styling doesn't necessarily make it inherently super valuable. This is a very typical department store quality piece from back in that time, and these are great pieces to actually experiment on. So I'm going to be doing a two-toned look on this, and I'd like the overall look of this to be kind of serene or calming. Now, watching this compilation, it might seem like I keep doing the same thing over and over again, but keep in mind that these videos are spread out over the last 4 years or so. So even though you're seeing them all together, I don't actually do the same thing every single time. But it is a look that sells really, really well in this area. A bit more of an artisan feel as opposed to something that's painted on the bottom and just has a wood top. And I personally just really like it. What do you guys think? Are you team two-toned, like the dipped look they sometimes call it? Or do you prefer something that's kind of all one color? I actually found this original mixed color a little bit on the cool side, so I added just a touch more green to kind of warm it up. I thought that would look best with what I plan to do with the upper section. So up next, we've got a piece that I refer to as the mouse poop dresser. This is a relatively inexpensive, very basic, solid wood framed laminate dresser. Now the drawer boxes themselves are at least partial wood, and the rest is laminate. Now this piece is filthy inside and out. There's a lot of mouse poop, a lot of staining, there's dirt, grime, there's some mildew in spots. She's pretty rough, and a couple of the drawers wouldn't open properly, so that's something else that I'm gonna have to fix as we go along. This is the type of piece that most people don't give a second look at thrift stores and auctions and stuff like that. These are my favorite pieces to work on, and as much as I love a big, beautiful solid wood antique, this is the kind of furniture I love to save because no one else wants to do it. Now keep this little routed groove in mind because I'm actually going to be changing that a little bit. I found it wasn't quite deep enough, so I'm actually going to redo it. Now, like I said, this top is laminate, so I'm scuff sanding here only. You can't sand and stain this stuff in the same way you can with wood. Certain types of laminate you can, and I might do a video, in the future showing that, but this type, not really. There were a couple sections I had pulled away from the frame, so a little bit of CA glue and activator will pull that and hold that nice and tight. And I had some leftover wood filler here. It was honestly just trying to get rid of it. It wasn't really my favorite, and that was really good for filling in all the little nicks and dings and divots in the top. I'm opting to prime before painting on this piece. Number one, because I exposed areas of the laminate, and I've also got wood filler there, so I want to make sure that everything is nice and smooth and uniform before I paint. Otherwise, my paint would look a little bit splotchy. It would soak in some areas and not so much in others. To deepen and emphasize that little routed area that they had, I just grabbed, I believe this was an 1/8 inch straight bit. It's just going to give a more pronounced separation between these two sort of faux drawers. I did a very light sort of gray paint wash on these, sanded them back slightly, and then applied Odie's oil. Now, this type of wood was never really meant to see the light of day. This was meant to have an opaque primer over it and then a faux wood grain applied. It wasn't meant to be seen on its own, but I kind of like that. I find it unique. I also wanted to put some of these casters on. It's kind of a heavy piece, even though it's small. And I believe these holes were originally either for casters or feet. It doesn't really matter. I'm putting casters on. And I opted to reuse the same hardware, just kind of clean it up a bit. Now, looking back at what I started with, most people would walk right by this, and hopefully I've convinced you to kind of give them a second look. Usually they're pretty sturdy, but they sure aren't pretty. Now this piece will undoubtedly go down as the boldest piece that I did over the last few years. From afar, this piece looks pretty impressive, but once you get up close, you can see all of the flaws, and honestly, I'm not a big fan of this fruit wood finish. So for me, this is the perfect piece to paint, and I'm going to be experimenting a little bit. Fusion Mineral Paint recently came out with a whole line of new colors. They sent a bunch of them to me to try out, and which one of those lineup do you think I went with? It's a color that I would normally never pick. For this piece, I had to go big and bold. Now here's something that I found intriguing. This piece has never been refinished before, but when I stripped off the old finish, look at what I found here along the edges. These are circular swirl marks from an orbital sander, and this would have actually been done at the factory. Now this top is a bit of a sad story that ended up turning out okay in the end. I went and stained it, sealed it, didn't love it, but I thought, I'll get the paint on and see if I like it any more or any less. And this color is quite something. It actually is a bit darker when it dries. It looks quite pink, so yeah, this top. Unfortunately, I still hated it after the paint, and I actually spilled a couple of drops of acetone on it by accident when I was cleaning something else and ended up having to strip the entire top. So what normally would be kind of a pain in the arse ended up being for the best because I didn't care for the color anyway. This time I opted for something a bit more brown, a little bit less red, and I think that matches the color of this paint a lot better. Around the time that this video came out, I actually got a new laser to play around with, and if you remember, one of the drawers had this section here where there would have been a sliding tray for, jewelry or change or whatever. I ended up using that laser to create a custom box, the exact width and length and depth that I needed. So I had the laser cut out all of the pieces, I put it together, stained it, and yeah, made a little box for that shelf. I am opting to reuse this hardware. It's way more ornate than I would normally go for, but it just seems to suit the piece. That blingy hardware just seemed to make sense. Looking back at what I started with, this fruit wood finish isn't for everyone. It's definitely not for me, although I do know that a lot of people do like it. For me, this was the perfect piece to kind of go big and bold on. It's a huge piece, and I definitely wanted to make a statement with this, and I'm pretty sure that I did. I also created a custom piece of art, which you'll see hanging above in the staging here. This next piece actually started off originally like this, and then turned into this, which I sold. And the person who bought it had it for a couple of years. They built a new house, didn't have space for it, and mentioned that they were going to sell it, and I basically bought it back. I wanted a second chance to do something a little bit different with this piece. As you can see, over the last few years, it's been very well loved by some kiddos, so we're going to give this a whole new look by making some fairly subtle changes, actually. Now, when I originally sold this, I sold it at quite a discount because of a couple of issues with the bottom drawer slides. Now, at the time, I did not have a table saw, and I didn't know anyone who could actually make these new runners for me, so I basically sold it with the caveat that these bottom drawers are a little wonky, but the person who bought it is a carpenter, and he makes beautiful furniture, and said, oh, no problem, I will recreate those. Well, if you have a tradesperson in your family or a handyman or anything like that, you know that household projects are usually the last ones to get done, and he never got around to it. By this point in my career, I did have a table saw, and so now I can actually redo it and fix those bottom drawers. So as you can see, I'm going from sort of that initial gray-blue color to more of a brown tone. And the other change I'm making is I'm going to bring the wood down a little bit, kind of like a couple other ones that you've seen already. I think this is really going to elevate the piece and make it less patchwork, which is kind of how I feel it looked initially when I redid it a few years back. Like everything was just kind of broken up, and I thought this would make it a lot more cohesive, just bringing that wood down a little bit. Anywhere on the bottom where I exposed the wood, I just added a tiny bit of primer. It's just going to help make sure that the paint that I do on the bottom is nice and smooth. And for the top and the top 3 drawers, I'm actually doing a paint wash. Now, initially I wanted to have these feet in that same paint wash as the top, but I quickly remembered that these do not very easily come off. They're screwed on, yes, but they are also really glued in, so paint it is. And with Fusion Mineral Paint, you don't actually need a top coat, and oftentimes I will just use their beeswax hemp oil finish. In this case, I'm opting to use the same finish as the top because I want a consistent sheen all the way down. Now, initially my plan was to reuse the black knobs that I had put on this piece the first time I redid it. If you remember, they look like this, but instead I opted for something a little bit more modern, a little less country. And this piece has, over the years, gone from this to my first iteration, which was this, to, with just some slight tweaks, this. So we are going to go way back now. This was, I think, my second, third video that I ever put out. And this is another one of those kind of 70s sort of dated looking pieces. And there's always people that get angry when you paint these, but I don't care. I always try to do what I think is going to help the piece sell and live on. And you know, in 99% of the cases, these pieces can always be refinished again if someone wants to change something. So for this one, I am doing something a little bit different. Basically the entire surround, so the top, the sides, the bottom trim, and the legs, I'm going to keep very light, and then just the drawers are going to be painted black. It's definitely a play with contrast here. Some would say it's a bit too stark of a contrast. Personally, I love how this turned out, but you're going to be the judge. I actually remember getting to this point and being so excited because I was absolutely loving the contrast here. And the black hardware on the black drawers, I thought was just going to be perfect. If you've been following my channel for a while, you will probably know that this is one of my absolute favorite pieces I ever did. Now, what's interesting about this This is a wood and paint compilation, but there wasn't actually any wood on this. This entire thing is MDF. The frame, the drawers, the top, the sides, everything is MDF with this weird coating on it. So what I opted to do with this was actually add wood to it. I'm going to be adding some quartersawn oak veneer and trying to take this 2017 monstrosity and make it look like a really old map cabinet. So after adding a little bit of dark stain in those grooves, it was time to apply the finish. Now I'm using Odie's oil here, no surprise. But what I want to do is have a bit of an ombre effect on the drawers. So I basically just used clear Odie's oil in the middle and some Odie's oil tinted with pigment on the outside. And what this is going to do is leave a light center. And the reason I want the center of these light is because that's where I'm going to place the hardware. It's going to kind of sort of make it look like, you know, these handles have been reached for a million times and the finish is kind of worn away. You know, just trying to help sell that this is older than it actually is. Once I have all of the wood strips applied, I actually went and applied a spray primer. And then mixed up a custom color to paint this. Eventually it was time to put the hardware on, and the best way I could come up with is to have a center point with the tape here, and then I made this little jig so that I know exactly where to place the holes. Now, in the original cabinet, they would skip every other one, and that's totally fine, but I'm trying to sell this as a map cabinet, so I need a handle on every, in quotations, drawer. Now, I always get comments on this piece saying there's too many handles. I don't know if you've looked at a map cabinet recently, but they have handles on every drawer, and in fact, a lot of them have 2 handles on every drawer. So what might seem like overkill for some, I think is actually perfect for this piece. I will forever refer to this piece as the one that got away because this is probably my favorite piece that I've ever done. It really speaks to my own personal aesthetic, and I would have loved to have put this in my home, but I did not have a wall big enough. So I had to sell it. Okay, so you remember the dresser that we already covered from this crazy set. It's time to work on the nightstands, and these were actually in worse shape than the dresser. The drawers were horrendous. There's hardly any wood on this piece. There's a little bit, but it's mostly pressed wood and a little bit of MDF mixed in there as well. I wasn't entirely sure what I was going to be able to do for these, if I was even going to be able to do them, but I had to give it a shot. So first things first, I have to take this apart. You can see the MDF back panel here. That's so cheap. Like, the rest of the drawer is plywood. Just put a plywood back on it, people. I don't know how much money they're actually saving by putting just that one MDF panel in the back. It's so weird to me. Now, these drawers were so poorly constructed that I opted to literally rip them apart, and I'm going to rebuild them. I'm going to build a whole new drawer box. So first I wanted to scrape these and see if I'd be able to save them. Then I had this idea that replacing the tops entirely would be a better idea. So I went to Home Depot. First I looked at some veneer. Wasn't quite what I was looking for. And then I thought maybe I could do something with this project panel. But when I got it home, I looked, and if you see if I put my finger there, I don't have enough to do two unless I turned it sideways. But if I did this, then at the very front, you would see the edge grain, which is not always a good look. So I decided to put that aside and focus on building the new drawer boxes. Now, like I said, the sides of these are pressed wood, and there's nothing really keeping it off the floor there. You can see it's literally touching the floor on the side. So I decided I was going to create a base similar to what the dresser had out of some scrap wood that I had. And as far as the tops go, I opted to apply some Bondo there, smooth that out, and just paint the darn top. I'm going to be painting the top, the sides, as well as the drawers. And I'll be adding, like I said, that new wood base. This is also going to make these a little bit taller. Vintage night tables have a tendency to be very small, and beds have gotten taller over the years. So adding, I think in total I added about 2 or 3 inches to the height of this. And actually you can see when I slide this into place, the side panel shows through. So I need to trace and cut that out and then raise the nightstand up and attach it to the new base. I went with a dark sort of walnut tone shade on this. I thought it would pair really nicely with this sort of grayish brown color. I'm definitely into the earthy paint tones, I've realized. In this video, it's all sort of like greens and browns, grays, and vivid purple, if you recall. Anyway, I was actually really impressed with myself with how this turned out, especially the drawer boxes. So much better, like no comparison. Again, to save money, I opted to reuse the old hardware. I think anyway, gave these 2 nightstands a whole new lease on life. Now, this piece I'm sharing with you is still one of the most talked about pieces that I've done over the years. This poor little thing was on Marketplace for a really, really long time, and he kept dropping the price and dropping the price and dropping the price. And finally I said, you know what? This thing's going to end up in the dump. I'm just going to buy it and see what I can do for it. Aside from the very obvious, there were some issues with the drawers. It's the first time I've seen duct tape holding drawers together. But one of the first things I wanted to tackle was getting rid of these waves. I told you earlier I don't really care for curvy things. I like very straight lines when it comes to furniture for the most part. I think Art Deco would kind of be the only exception to that for me, but these waves had to go. Now these are very cottagecore and some people love that. Not a fan, and this was my piece, so they had to go. I also opted to trim the legs off. I'm going to be putting a new base on this and actually adding big industrial casters because I want to turn this into kind of an apothecary sort of looking piece. If you haven't noticed by now, I absolutely love that vibe. I'm apparently really into dark academia without really knowing what to call it for the longest time. So the fact that this style is quite popular still is really, really good for me. So this was done back before I had a router, so to make that kind of light groove in the drawer faces here, all I did was set up a straight edge, and then using this little portable saw, I made a really, really shallow cut. Basically does the same thing a router would do. These drawer boxes needed a lot of attention too, so I opted to basically take them apart. And you can see them on the floor here. I have since gotten a workbench, but I didn't have one back then. It took me about 20 minutes per drawer to get those cleaned up. Now, normally when staining pine, you want to use a wood conditioner, which helps the stain not go blotchy, and it also helps deal with something called grain reversal. And grain reversal on pine is very pronounced, and I wanted to kind of capitalize on that and actually emphasize it. So this kind of wild grain you see here, I actually wanted that on purpose. Now, if you're still with me here nearly at the end, I have a little treat for you. Enjoy. I just want to say a huge thank you to anyone who sat with me here for nearly an hour and kind of revisited my favorite wood and stain combinations from over the years. If you like this sort of video, please consider subscribing, leaving a comment, giving me a thumbs up. All of these things really help my channel, and my channel could use a little love right now, I'm going to be honest. I have one more project to share with you after this reveal, and then you're free to go. This is also going way back to the beginning of my channel, and these were kind of an accident. I knew roughly what I wanted to do with them, but I wasn't sure exactly how they were going to turn out. Now, these are big, beefy nightstands. They're a mix of solid wood and veneer, as well as some pressed wood. So what I thought I would do for this piece is have a whitewash top and bottom and a dark kind of ceruse style finish in the middle and on the drawers. So the first thing to do was strip off all of the old finish, which actually came off fairly easily, thank goodness. Sometimes it doesn't. Gave everything a nice light sanding. On the areas that were going to be actually painted with solid paint, I just did a scuff sand versus the top here and the bottom where I'm actually using a paint wash, so I want those down to bare wood. So for this sort of ceruse look, I'm doing a couple things. First of all, I'm applying this darker paint, and then I'm going to very lightly sand it back so that you see some of the wood grain underneath. Then it's very important to apply some sort of a buffer before your white wax. So in this case, I'm just using a clear kind of furniture wax. And then I can go in with the white wax, and the white wax is going to kind of settle into some of the open pores of the oak. You're not going to be able to do this on every type of wood, but on big open grain woods like oak, it's perfect. I was going for a look that was kind of like denim, like faded, old faded denim, and I don't know if I pulled it off, but I think I got pretty close. I ended up reusing the original hardware on these, and it's pretty straightforward. I didn't really have a lot of repairs to do for once. I actually really like how these turned out. I'm not generally a ceruse fan, but in this case, I think it worked perfectly, and to me, it really does have kind of that faded denim vibe. What do you guys think? Big thank you again for sitting with me for almost an hour. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again soon.